In the shadows of residential neighborhoods, as the sun dips behind the buildings and the streetlights begin to hum with their yellowish glow, Japanese mothers whisper warnings to their children. Don't walk home late, they say. Don't talk to strangers. But there's something more to their voices. Something that wasn't there a year ago. A fear that has no name, or one too terrible to utter aloud. Kuchisake-Onna. The woman with the slit mouth. Long pause. The sound of distant footsteps on gravel. School records from 1979 reveal an inexplicable phenomenon. Between March and June of that year, thousands of children across Japan stopped walking alone. Schools began receiving calls from terrified parents. Playgrounds, normally bustling until nightfall, were deserted before 5 p.m. Something had changed. Something had awakened. The first time her name was heard was in Gifu Prefecture, according to local police records. A 7-year-old girl came running home, breathless, her cheeks red from the cold and panic. Her mother remembers that little Yuki couldn't stop trembling. The sound of a girl's labored breathing. The sound of a sliding door slamming shut. Her mother tried to calm her down. She offered her hot tea. She stroked her hair. But Yuki just kept repeating the same words over and over, like a broken record. The woman with the face mask. The woman with the face mask asked me if I was pretty. In Japan, wearing a surgical mask is common. People with colds, allergies, or simply seeking privacy wear them discreetly. But that March afternoon, what Yuki saw was not just any woman protecting herself from spring pollen. According to the testimony the girl gave days later, when she was finally able to articulate complete sentences, the events unfolded as follows. Yuki was walking home from school along her usual route. The neighborhood streets were the same as always, low houses with dark roofs, vending machines on the corners, bicycles parked without locks. Everything was familiar. Everything was safe. Until he turned the corner of Sakura Street. There, under the street lamp that always flickered before turning on completely, stood a woman. She wore a long coat, beige or cream-colored, as Yuki remembered. Her black hair fell straight over her shoulders. And her face was covered by a white surgical mask. The woman was motionless. Perfectly still. As if waiting. Yuki felt something strange. A pang in her stomach. The instinct that all children have, that inner voice that says, something's not right, began to scream inside her. But it was daytime. There was light. And the woman seemed normal. Then the woman spoke. Watashi, kirai? Am I pretty? Yuki stopped. The question hung in the air like mist. The woman hadn't moved, but somehow she seemed closer. The eyes above the mask stared at the girl. Eyes that Yuki would later describe as too big, too dark. The little girl nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. Yes, you're pretty. That's when the woman smiled. Or at least, that's what it seemed like. Because the mask moved in a way it shouldn't have. As if the mouth beneath it were too large. As if the smile extended beyond where it should have ended. The woman reached for her mask. Pale hands. Long nails painted a dark red, almost black. And with a deliberate, slow movement, she lowered the white fabric that covered her face. Yuki has never been able to fully describe what she saw. Therapists who worked with her in the following weeks reported that the girl went into shock whenever she tried to recall that moment. She sweated. She trembled. On one occasion, she vomited. But what he was able to say, what remained etched in his memory with the terrible clarity of nightmares, was this. The woman's mouth was cut. Torn from ear to ear in a grotesque, permanent grin. The wound was deep, exposing teeth and gums in an inhuman grimace. The flesh on either side of the cheeks hung loosely, as if the scars were ancient but had never healed properly. And then, with that impossible mouth, the woman spoke again. Kore demo. Even now. Yuki ran. She doesn't remember turning around. She doesn't remember the way back. She only remembers the pure, animal terror that drove her through the streets until she was inside her house with the door closed and the bolt locked. That night, Yuki's mother called the police. The officer who took the statement was polite but skeptical. Probably a woman with a facial deformity, he suggested. Perhaps burns. An unfortunate situation that frightened the little girl. But the next day, another report arrived. And another one. And another one. The Gifu police station began receiving similar calls from different neighborhoods. Children who had seen a woman wearing a mask. A woman asking if she was pretty. A woman whose face, beneath the white cloth, was a nightmare. At Minami Elementary School, 5 students reported similar encounters in a single week. Parents began picking up their children themselves. School routes, normally traveled by small groups of unsupervised children, now required adult escort. The woman with the face mask. We saw her. She asks if she's pretty. Her mouth, her mouth. On April 15, 1979, a 9-year-old boy named Takeshi was found hiding in an alley 3 blocks from his school. He had been there for 2 hours, huddled behind a dumpster, refusing to move. When his father finally found him, the boy was white, his lips blue from the cold. She chased me, Takeshi said. I ran, but she was fast. Very fast. Rapid footsteps on asphalt. Heavy breathing. According to his testimony, Takeshi had made a mistake. When the woman showed him her mutilated face and asked, even now, he had screamed. He had recoiled in horror. And she had begun to follow him. The sound of footsteps becomes faster, almost inhuman. He was moving strangely, Takeshi recalled. Like he was floating. Like his feet weren't quite touching the ground. And he was making a sound, like scissors cutting through the air. A metallic, high-pitched sound. Scissors opening and closing rhythmically. Takeshi's father noticed something else. In his son's backpack, neatly folded, was a handkerchief he didn't recognize. It was white silk, stained with something dark in one corner. Something that looked like dried blood. When he asked Takeshi about the handkerchief, the boy turned even paler. She dropped it, he whispered. When she was running after me, she dropped it and I picked it up without thinking. And then I heard her voice behind me, give it back, pretty boy. Give me back what's mine. Silence. The handkerchief was handed over to the police. It was never determined who it belonged to. By May 1979, reports had spread beyond Gifu. Entire prefectures began reporting sightings. Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, Fukuoka. Like a disease, the presence of Kuchisake-Onna was spreading throughout the Japanese archipelago. Newspapers began to cover the story. At first with skepticism, then with caution, finally with something close to alarm. The descriptions were disturbingly consistent. Testimony 1, a tall woman, wearing a long coat and a surgical mask. Testimony 2, his eyes were strange. They shone in the dark like a cat's. Testimony 3, he was carrying scissors. Enormous scissors. He was holding them with both hands. Testimony 4, her voice was sweet at first, but when she showed her face, it changed. It became deep. Schools began implementing protocols. No student was allowed to walk alone. Extracurricular activities ended before nightfall. Some schools hired additional security just to patrol the perimeters during dismissal times. But the encounters continued. One afternoon in June, in the Shibuya district of Tokyo, a 14-year-old girl named Akiko experienced what many consider the most detailed and disturbing encounter with the entity. Akiko was returning from high school. She was a diligent, responsible student. She knew her neighborhood like the back of her hand. But that afternoon she took a shortcut she didn't usually use, a less busy side street that would cut her travel time by 5 minutes. The shops on both sides were closing. The metal shutters were coming down with their characteristic sound. Daylight was fading behind the buildings, plunging the street into a bluish gloom. Akiko noticed the silence first. In Tokyo, silence is unnatural. There's always noise. There's always life. But at that moment, on that street, Every sound seemed to have been absorbed by something invisible. Then he saw her. At the end of the street, where a lamppost cast a pool of yellow light, stood a female figure. Akiko describes how, at first glance, she thought she was beautiful. The long, elegant coat. The perfect black hair. The upright, graceful posture. But there was something about the figure's immobility. The way it didn't move at all, not even the slight, natural sway of the human body when standing. Akiko took a step. Then another. The woman didn't move. When they were separated by about 20 meters, the woman finally spoke. "Watashi, Kirai?" Akiko had heard the stories. Of course she had. All the students knew them. They were told during breaks, in hushed tones, with that mixture of fear and excitement that only teenagers can conjure. But hearing a story and living it are completely different things. "I thought it was a joke," Akiko later recalled in an interview with a local publication. "I thought it was someone in a costume, trying to scare people. I felt more annoyed than scared. I was tired, I wanted to get home." So he answered. With adolescent irritation, with mock bravery, he answered. "Yes, you're pretty. Can I go now?" A laugh. Low. Gutural. That doesn't sound entirely human. The woman moved then. She didn't walk. Akiko insists on this. There were no steps. She was simply far away and then close. As if the meters between them had contracted in an instant. Now they were separated by less than 2 meters. Akiko could see the details. The coat wasn't beige as others had described, but a mottled cream color. The hair wasn't perfectly straight but slightly damp, as if she had just come out of some wet place. And the mask. The white surgical mask had stains. Small dark stains around where the mouth should be. Then he asked again, Akiko recounts. But this time it was different. His voice sounded as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "Watashi, Kirai?" And I couldn't move. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The woman brought her hands to her mask. Akiko noticed her nails. Red. Long curved like claws. And slowly, with theatrical deliberation, the woman lowered her mask. Akiko's description has been cited in numerous articles and books about the phenomenon. It is detailed. It is accurate. And it is absolutely terrifying. The wound stretched from ear to ear, he says. It wasn't a normal scar. It was as if someone had cut her face with something extremely sharp, and then the wound had become infected. There were dark scabs around the edges. The flesh was swollen and red. Her teeth were perfectly visible, white against the reddened flesh. And when she smiled, the wound opened wider, like a mouth within a mouth. But the worst part wasn't the wound. The worst part was his eyes. They looked at me with hunger. No, not hunger. It was something deeper. As if he needed something from me. My confirmation. My validation. My horror. The woman spoke again, and Akiko swears her lips didn't move the right way. The sound came from the wound itself. Kore demo. Kore demo Kirai. Even now. Am I still pretty even now? Akiko did something few had done up to that point. Something that, according to the stories already circulating, could mean the difference between survival and... She lied. Yes, he told the creature. Even now you are beautiful. The woman remained motionless. Her head tilted slightly, like a bird examining something curious. Dark eyes studied Akiko's face, searching for lies, searching for fear. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, the woman smiled. Or at least, her cut mouth curved into something that could be interpreted as a satisfied smile. He took something out of his coat. An object that shone even in the dim light. Scissors. They were enormous, Akiko describes. Not ordinary scissors. They were like pruning shears, with long handles and curved blades. And they were stained. Stained with something dark. The woman raised the scissors. Akiko closed her eyes. When Akiko opened her eyes, she was alone in the street. The woman had disappeared. There was no sound of footsteps moving away. There were no shadows moving. She was simply gone. Akiko ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She got home, locked the door, and didn't leave for 3 days. But when she finally returned to school, she noticed something. Looking in the mirror that morning, she saw that a lock of her hair was missing. A perfect lock, neatly cut near her right ear. He had cut it with scissors. Sharp scissors. And Akiko didn't remember feeling it. The media went into a frenzy. The Asahi Shimbun published a front-page article, "The Cut Woman Panic, Mass Hysteria or Real Threat?" The Yomiuri Shimbun sent reporters to interview dozens of witnesses. Television programs devoted entire segments to the phenomenon. But with the media coverage came something else: theories. Stories. Attempts to explain the origin of Kuchisake-Onna. The grandmothers said she had always been there. That the woman with the slashed mouth was an ancient yōkai, a vengeful spirit that had existed for centuries, hidden in the shadows until something had awakened her. Others spoke of a real woman. A beautiful woman who had lived in the Heian period, 1,000 years ago. They say she was married to a jealous samurai who, suspecting her infidelity, took his katana and slashed her mouth from ear to ear, saying, "Who will find you beautiful now?" The woman died from her wounds, but her spirit remained. Condemned to wander for eternity, seeking validation of her beauty. Searching for someone who would find her beautiful even with her horrific injury. But there's another story. A more modern one. More disturbing because it seems more plausible. They say that in 1968, 11 years before the panic of 1979, there was an accident at a hospital in Nagoya. A young woman had been admitted for cosmetic surgery. Something simple. A minor adjustment to her face. But something went terribly wrong. The rumors vary in the details, but the gist is the same: the surgeon made a mistake. Or perhaps the patient moved. Or maybe there was an earthquake, one of the thousands that shake Japan every year. The scalpel slipped. The resulting injury was catastrophic. Facial muscles were destroyed. Nerves were damaged. And when the woman finally awoke from the anesthesia and saw her reflection, they say she went mad. That she attacked the nurses. That she had to be sedated and restrained. That she spent weeks in a psychiatric ward, refusing to eat, refusing to speak, only looking at herself in the fragments of mirror she managed to obtain. And then, one night, he disappeared. The hospital's security cameras showed her room empty. The window open. The wind moving the curtains. But they were on the 3rd floor. There was no way she could have jumped without. They never found his body. By June 1979, all of Japan seemed to hold its breath. The streets emptied at dusk. Children no longer played outside after school. And in every home, families developed their own protective rituals. Some hung omamori amulets on their doors. Others sprinkled salt on their doorsteps. Old women burned incense and murmured Buddhist sutras in the corners of their homes. But none of that seemed to stop her. Because Kuchisake-Onna did not respect traditional barriers. She cared nothing for sacred symbols. She did not flee from holy water or prayers. She was simply asking, "Am I pretty?" And depending on your answer, your fate was sealed. Among the students, rules began to circulate. Instructions passed from mouth to mouth on how to survive an encounter with the Slit-Mouthed Woman. No one knew where these rules came from. They simply appeared, like the instinctive knowledge animals have about predators. Rule number 1, never say she's not pretty. If you say she's ugly, she'll chase you. She'll catch you no matter how fast you run. And with her scissors. Rule number 2, if you say she's pretty before she takes off her mask, you must say she's still pretty afterwards. Lying is allowed. The creature seems to accept lies. But indecision, doubt, that it will not tolerate. Rule number 3, if you have candy, offer it to him. This rule originated from an incident in Yokohama. An 8-year-old boy named Hiroshi encountered Kuchisake-Onna on his way home. When she showed him her mutilated face, Hiroshi, paralyzed with terror, rummaged through his backpack without thinking. His fingers found something, the peppermint candies his grandmother had given him that morning. With trembling hands, she offered them to him. The woman stopped. Her head tilted. And then, with strangely delicate movements, she took a candy from the child's hand. He unwrapped it slowly. He put it in his mouth. And Hiroshi ran. When he got home and finally dared to look out the window, there was no one in the street. But where the woman had been, candy wrappers lay scattered on the wet asphalt. They had all been unwrapped. They had all been sucked. Rule number 4, respond with a question. This was the riskiest. Some children reported that when Kuchisake-Onna asked, "Am I pretty?" if you responded with, "What do you think?" the creature would become confused. It would freeze, processing the question, giving you precious seconds to escape. But this tactic didn't always work. What do I think? What do I think? I think you're an insolent child. And finally, rule number 5, the strangest of all, if you ask her if you are handsome first, she disappears. No one understood why. Some speculated that Kuchisake-Onna was trapped in her own trauma. That she had once been beautiful, and that beauty had been taken from her. That her entire existence now revolved around that single, obsessive question. Turning the question around, confronting her with the beauty of another, broke the spell. Temporarily, at least. Not all encounters ended in escape. There are stories whispered about. Stories that newspapers didn't publish. Stories that authorities denied or ignored. Like Kenji's. Kenji was a 22-year-old university student. It was late, past midnight on a Friday in June. He had missed the last train from Shinjuku and decided to walk home. He was young. He was athletic. He didn't believe in ghosts or urban legends. They're just stories to scare children, he had told his friends that night at the bar. He was walking along a well-lit avenue when he heard footsteps behind him. Footsteps in heels. Steady. Always staying at the same distance. At first, he didn't pay them any attention. It was Tokyo. There are always people in the streets. But when he turned onto a darker side street, the footsteps followed him. Kenji quickened his pace. His heels clicked faster. She stopped abruptly. Her heels stopped clicking. He turned around. There, about 10 meters away, under a flickering street lamp, she was. The long coat. The black hair. The white face mask. Kenji felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, pure and irrational fear. Watashi, Kirai. Kenji tried to be rational. He tried to stay calm. He was an adult. He was an educated man. This was absurd. This is ridiculous, he said aloud. I don't know what you're trying to do, but it's not funny. The woman stepped forward. Watashi, Kirai. The question came again, but this time the voice was different. Deeper. With an echo that shouldn't exist in an open street. Kenji felt his courage evaporate. Yes, he said quickly. Yes, you're pretty. Now leave me alone. He began to walk backwards, without turning his back on the figure. The woman moved again. But this time it was different. She didn't walk. She glided. As if the space between them meant nothing. As if the laws of physics were suggestions she could ignore. In an instant, I was right in front of him. Wet breathing. Too close. Kenji could smell something. A smell of decay barely masked by cheap perfume. A smell of infected flesh. The woman's hands moved up towards her mask. No, Kenji whispered. Please, no. But she didn't stop. What Kenji saw that night changed him. His friends say he was never the same again. He dropped out of university. He moved away from Tokyo. For years he refused to talk about the incident. But in 1995, 16 years later, he finally gave an interview to a paranormal investigator. His voice on the recording is flat, emotionless, as if something inside him had been switched off long ago. The wound was, there are no words. I've tried to forget it. I've gone to therapy. I've taken medication. But every time I close my eyes, I see it. It wasn't just a wound. It was as if someone had tried to turn it into a smile. The corners of her mouth stretched up to her ears. There were scabs. There were things moving in the flesh. And then she asked me again. Long pause in the recording. Kore demo. And I couldn't lie. I couldn't. My voice betrayed me. I said nothing. I just stared at her in horror. And that was enough for her. That was my answer. The sound of scissors opening. She took out the scissors. They were old. Rusty. With stains I don't want to think about where they came from. And she said to me, in that voice that seemed to come from everywhere, then I will make you beautiful like me. Silence. Kenji woke up in a hospital 3 days later. He had been found unconscious in an alley, suffering from severe hypothermia. The doctors didn't understand what had happened. There were no injuries. No signs of assault. But Kenji insists he felt the scissors. He felt the cold metal against his cheek. He felt the pressure as she began to cut. And then, nothing. As if something or someone had saved him at the last moment. Sound of a distant ambulance. In his interview, Kenji concludes with this. I don't know why she let me go. I don't know what I stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I feel like she's still there. Waiting. And I wonder if the next time I see her, if there is a next time, I'll be so lucky. The recording cuts off. By July 1979, the authorities could no longer ignore the phenomenon. The panic was real. Schools were reporting massive absenteeism. Nightlife businesses were suffering. Police stations were overwhelmed with reports. A special press conference was organized. Tokyo Metropolitan Police officers, along with psychologists and sociologists, attempted to calm the public. What we are witnessing is a case of mass hysteria. There is no evidence of a woman with a slashed face attacking citizens. The testimonies are inconsistent. The descriptions vary. This is simply an urban legend that has been amplified by the media but the official explanations satisfied no one. How could so many witnesses, in so many different cities, describe the same figure? How could the details be so consistent? The surgical mask. The long coat. The question. The scissors. Some psychologists propose that it was a case of social contagion, a phenomenon where an idea or behavior spreads through a population like a virus. The children heard the stories, internalized them, and then their minds created experiences based on those expectations. But that didn't explain the testimonies of adults. Educated, rational people who had no interest in perpetuating urban legends. Like Dr. Sato. Dr. Yoshiro Sato was a respected psychiatrist in Osaka. He had treated several children who reported encounters with Kuchisake-Onna. At first, he assumed it was trauma induced by mass hysteria. But then, one night in August, he saw her himself. Dr. Sato was leaving his clinic late. It was a hot and humid night, typical of a Japanese summer. Cicadas were singing in the trees. The air smelled of hot asphalt and approaching rain. He was walking toward his car when he noticed a woman standing by a lamppost. There was no one else in the parking lot. Just her. At first, Dr. Sato thought she might be a patient in crisis. He approached her professionally, intending to offer help. "Are you all right?" he asked. The woman turned towards him. And then she saw the mask. The coat. The hair. Dr. Sato felt his blood run cold. All the stories he had dismissed as childish fantasy suddenly seemed terrifyingly real. "Sensei, watashi, kirai?" "Doctor, am I pretty?" In his official report, which he submitted to the Japan Psychiatric Association 3 weeks later, Dr. Sato wrote, "I've dedicated my professional life to the study of the human mind. I've treated cases of psychosis, schizophrenia, and dissociative disorders. But what I experienced that night cannot be explained by any psychological framework I know. The figure was tangible. Real. It wasn't a hallucination induced by suggestion. It interacted with me. It waited for my response. And when I finally mustered the courage to say, yes, when I said she was beautiful, she revealed her face. What I saw defies all medical logic. A wound of that magnitude should be fatal. The infection should be massive. Yet there she was. Standing. Smiling. And when I pulled out my car keys with trembling hands and ran, she didn't follow me. She simply stood there, in the light, touching her face as if my response had provided her with some kind of temporary validation. Pause. I can't explain what I saw. I can only testify that it was real." Dr. Sato's report caused controversy in the medical community. Some colleagues suggested that he himself had succumbed to hysteria. Others defended his professional integrity. But the report had an effect. The authorities began to take the phenomenon more seriously. Night patrols were increased in areas with frequent sightings. Additional lights were installed on poorly lit streets. Schools received funding for after-school escort programs. And slowly, gradually, the sightings began to decrease. By October 1979, the Kuchisake-Onna panic had subsided. Reports became less frequent. The streets began to fill again with children playing. Life returned to something resembling normalcy. Some said it was exactly what the authorities claimed, mass hysteria that eventually dissipated. Others weren't so sure. Because although the encounters diminished, they never completely ceased. Even today, decades later, there are occasional reports. A masked figure seen on an empty street. A question whispered in the darkness. Am I pretty? In 1990, 11 years after the initial panic, a high school student in Nagasaki reported an encounter. In 2004, a child in Sapporo. In 2015, a woman in Fukuoka. The descriptions remain consistent. Disturbingly consistent. And there's something else. Something the researchers noticed when they began collecting and analyzing all the testimonies. In each city where the most intense sightings of Kuchisake-Onna occurred in 1979, there was something in common. Hospitals. Not just any hospital. Specifically, hospitals that had plastic surgery departments or psychiatric units. As if the entity were searching for something. Or as if it were connected to these places in some deep and inexplicable way. In 2008, an investigative journalist named Takahashi Ryu spent 3 years tracing hospital records from the period between 1968 and 1979. What he found was disturbing. At least 7 different hospitals reported missing female patients. These women had been admitted for facial surgeries or psychiatric treatment related to body dysmorphia. A patient disappeared from a hospital in Nagoya in 1969. Another in Osaka in 1972. One more in Tokyo in 1975. The records stated that they had been discharged. That their families had picked them up. That the paperwork was complete. But when Takahashi tried to contact the families, he found something strange. They didn't exist. The phone numbers led to disconnected lines. The addresses were for demolished buildings or buildings that had never existed. It was as if someone had fabricated the documents to hide the fact that these women had simply vanished. Takahashi published his findings in a research journal. The article caused a brief stir, but was quickly buried. Hospitals threatened defamation lawsuits. Medical authorities dismissed it as sensationalist journalism. And then, 6 months after publication, Takahashi had his own encounter. He was working late in his office, a small space on the 5th floor of an old building in Shibuya. It was past midnight. He was alone. Or at least, that's what I thought. He heard the elevator arrive on his floor. The doors opened. But no one stepped out. The doors remained open, and Takahashi could hear the elevator's hum floating in the silence. Something told him not to look. Every instinct screamed at him to stay in his office, to close the door, to ignore whatever was out there. But she was a journalist. Curiosity was part of her nature. He got up. He walked to the door. He opened it. The hallway was empty. The elevator at the end of the corridor had its doors wide open. The interior light flickered faintly. And then he saw the shadow. He wasn't sure at first. He thought it might be his eyes adjusting to the light in the hallway. But no. There was definitely a shadow cast from inside the elevator. A shadow that shouldn't be there because there was no one in the elevator. The shadow of a woman. And then she heard the voice. Coming from the elevator. Clear but distant, as if traveling through water. "Takahashi-san, am I pretty?" Takahashi closed the door. With trembling hands, she locked it. She walked away to the center of her office, her heart pounding against her ribs. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Stopping right in front of her door. Then, a sound. Something being dragged against the wood of the door. Like nails. Or like. Takahashi didn't sleep that night. He stayed in his office, with all the lights on, until dawn. When he finally dared to open the door, the hallway was empty. But there were marks on the door. Deep scratches in the wood. And when he examined them more closely, he noticed something among the splinters. A hair. Black. Long. Takahashi never wrote about Kuchisake-Onna again. When asked, he simply says that some stories are better left untold. Over the decades, Kuchisake-Onna has become part of modern Japanese folklore. She has appeared in films, manga, anime, and video games. She is a familiar figure to generations of Japanese people. But among paranormal researchers, the debate continues. What is Kuchisake-Onna, really? Some believe it is a classic yōkai, a spirit that has always existed in Japanese mythology but has taken on a modern form. Like the kitsune or tanuki that appear in ancient tales, Kuchisake-Onna has simply adapted its manifestation to the contemporary world. Instead of wandering through forests and temples, he now walks the streets of cities. Instead of wearing traditional clothing, he wears modern coats. Even his most iconic symbol, the surgical mask, is perfectly appropriate for post-industrial Japan. Others propose a darker theory, that Kuchisake-Onna is the spirit of a real woman who suffered terrible trauma. That the obsession with beauty that characterizes Japanese society, the expectations placed on women, the pressure for physical perfection, somehow manifested this entity. According to this interpretation, she is the embodiment of the fear of ugliness. The terror of being rejected because of your appearance. The desperation of seeking validation in a world that judges relentlessly. And there is a third theory. One that few dare to fully articulate. That Kuchisake-Onna is not a singular entity. That there are multiple women. Women who suffered similar tragedies. Women whose faces were mutilated, whether by accident or violence. Women who died without finding peace. And now, united by their shared trauma, they walk the streets of Japan. Searching. Asking. Waiting for an answer that can never fully satisfy them. Am I pretty? Am I pretty? Am I pretty? In the internet age, stories of Kuchisake-Onna have found new life. Online forums are filled with alleged sightings. Grainy YouTube videos purport to show real encounters. Reddit threads debate each new report. But amidst the digital noise, there are testimonies that feel different. More genuine. More disturbing. In 2019, a man uploaded a video to a Japanese paranormal forum. The video was filmed on his phone as he walked home from a train station in Yokohama. It was almost midnight. In the video, the man can be seen walking down a shopping street. The shops are closed. Neon lights reflect off the darkened windows. His breathing is audible in the phone's microphone. And then it stops. What the hell, her voice whispers in the video. The camera shakes as he turns the phone. At the end of the street, barely visible under a flickering street lamp, there's a figure. The man zooms in. The quality is poor, but the silhouette is unmistakable. Long coat. Straight hair. And something white covering the lower part of his face. It can't be. It can't be real. The figure begins to move. It doesn't walk. It glides. The camera follows it, now shaking violently. And then, just before the video cuts, the figure is much closer than it should be. The eyes are visible now. Dark. Staring directly at the camera. And a voice, distorted by the poor audio but unmistakably female, asks, "Am I pretty?" The video cuts to static. The video was analyzed by experts. Some say it's fake, created with digital effects. Others aren't sure. The distortion in the audio when the figure speaks is anomalous. It doesn't match typical patterns of edited audio. The man who uploaded the video never posted anything else. His account was deleted days later. Attempts to trace his identity were unsuccessful. But the video remains. Re-uploaded again and again. Viewed millions of times. And in the comments, amidst the mockery and skepticism, are messages from people saying, "I've seen her too. This happened to me 5 years ago. She's still out there." Fukuoka, 2021. I saw her near the station. My cousin swears it happened to her in Sendai. They didn't believe me. But I know what I saw. The scissors. I'll never forget the sound of the scissors. There's something about Kuchisake-Onna that transcends mere urban legend. Something that resonates deeply within the collective psyche. Perhaps that is the question itself. Am I pretty? It's a question we all ask ourselves. Out loud or in silence. In front of the mirror or in the darkness of our minds. It's a question laden with insecurity, with a desperate desire for validation, with the fear of rejection. And Kuchisake-Onna, with her mutilated face, is the physical manifestation of that fear. The fear that, beneath the surface, beneath the mask we show to the world, lies something horrible. Something that, if others saw it, would cause them to reject us. But there is another aspect of the legend that is equally disturbing. No matter how you answer their question, it's never enough. If you say she's not pretty, she'll hound you. If you say she is, she'll show you her true colors and ask again. Even if you lie and say she's still beautiful, she knows. She always knows. It is an impossible quest for satisfaction. A need that can never be fulfilled. A void that cannot be filled with words. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thing of all. Today, more than 40 years after the Panic of 1979, Kuchisake-Onna remains. Not as a paralyzing terror that empties the streets, but as a whispering presence on the margins of the Japanese consciousness. Parents still tell the story to their children. Don't talk to strangers. Especially not to women wearing face masks who ask about your beauty. The streets are full again. Children are playing. Life is normal. But when the sun sets, when the shadows lengthen, when you walk alone down an empty street and hear footsteps behind you, maybe you turn around and there's nobody there. Or perhaps you see a figure. At the end of the street. Under a lamppost. Wearing a long coat and with black hair. And before you can move, before you can run, you hear the voice. Watashi, Kirai? What would you answer? Would you tell the truth? Would you lie? Would you offer them candy? Would you ask your own question? The rules have been passed. The survival strategies shared. But in that moment, with those dark eyes looking at you, with that impossible presence before you, would you follow the rules? Or would fear freeze you? And if you answer, if you say, yes, you are pretty, what will you do when she lowers her mask? When I show you what's underneath? When she smiles with that impossible mouth and asks again. Kore demo kirai. Even now. Am I still pretty even now? Records are never complete. Stories never truly end. Because some questions have no answers. And some answers. Long pause. Some answers have consequences that we don't understand until it's too late. Kuchisake-Onna still walks the streets of Japan. In Tokyo and Osaka. In Kyoto and in small towns that barely appear on maps. Asking questions. Always asking questions. Seeking an answer that will satisfy his tormented soul. An answer that, perhaps, does not exist. Am I pretty? Am I pretty? Am I pretty? And somewhere, right now, as you listen to this story, someone is walking alone. Down an empty street. In the dark. And someone. Or something. He is watching them. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting to become visible. Waiting to ask the question. Watashi, Kirai?